Welcome to another virtual Live Talks Los Angeles event. We welcome Dr. Vivek Murthy to our screen to talk about his new book, Together, The Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World. Dr. Murthy served as the 19th Surgeon General of the United States from 2014 through 17, and as Surgeon General, he created initiatives to tackle our country's most urgent public health issues, including addiction, the opioid crisis, the health risks of e-cigarettes, and promoting physical activity. He also focused on chronic stress and isolation as prevalent problems that have profound implications for health, productivity, and happiness. He'll be in conversation with Kate Hudson, Golden Globe Award winner and Academy Award nominee with a long list of film and TV credits. She's a successful entrepreneur, having founded her own brands, Fabletics, Happy by Nature, and her own vodka brand, King Street. She is also a New York Times bestselling author and appeared on our stage for her second book, Pretty Fun, Creating and Celebrating, A Lifetime of Tradition. She and her brother Oliver host the podcast Sibling Revelry. Her many charitable and humanitarian affiliations include the Hawn Foundation's Mind Up program, the UN's World Food Program, Baby to Baby, Operation Smile, and numerous other organizations dedicated to protecting the rights and well-being of women, children, and education around the world. They'll chat for about 45 minutes or so, and then we're going to take some audience questions that were submitted in advance. So welcome to both of you.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
I'm so excited to do this. So I just thought I'd start with introducing kind of how we met, which was on our podcast, Sibling Revelry. And I had the honor of having you and your sister Rashmi on. And one of the things that was always challenging, and I'm sure you get this your whole life, is the how to pronounce your name. So it's Vivek.
That's right.
And then it's Murthy.
Murthy, right? That's right.
Okay. The other thing that I thought was really fun, which I would like to say, the irony of today that we're doing this today is that I have a movie coming out at the end of the year. And the first single from the movie is out, and it's called Together. So,
really? Oh my gosh, I love that.
Sia wrote and directed this movie, and she wrote all the music. And so I thought that was really fun. But let's get into it. So Vivek, I guess, we'll get into your tenure as Surgeon General and how that sort of informed this book. But let's just talk about why this is the choice direction of your first book.
Well, Kate, when I came out of my time in government, after I finished being Surgeon General, I was thinking about two things. One is I kept going over all of these issues I had worked on in government, from the opioid crisis to dealing with violence in communities to thinking about chronic illnesses and depression and anxiety. And I was asking myself the question, is there something deeper here that's going on, something that's more at the root level, driving so many of these issues that I was worried about? And I kept coming back to this issue of loneliness and disconnection. And the more I delved into the research around it, the more I came to see that it was in fact a root cause and a contributor to so much of what I was struggling with as Surgeon General and so much of what we read about on the front page of the paper each day. But there was another thing going on in my head, which is that when I came out of office, I had a 9-month-old son, and we were blessed a few months later to find out that we were pregnant with our daughter. And as I started thinking, not just as a doctor or a husband or as a son, but also as a dad, about what I wanted to do in the world, nothing became more important than trying to create a world that was better for our kids, a world ultimately that was more nurturing, more hospitable, where people were more likely to be compassionate, to give people the benefit of the doubt. Because as a dad who, I will admit, tends to be overprotective of my children, I know that I can't be there for them all the time, and that they're going to grow up and they're going to depend on the people that they encounter in school and the workplace and strangers in their neighborhood. And how they are treated and how they choose to treat others is going to make a profound difference in the quality of their life. And so thinking about all of those things together kept leading me down this path of social connection, recognizing that it's an extraordinary resource that we have to improve our health, to enhance our performance, to enable us to be more fulfilled in life. But I realized that that wasn't even on my radar for so much of my life. Even though I trained in a healing profession, I trained in medicine, it just wasn't something that I was thinking about often enough. And that's why I decided to focus on this topic.
Explain why how it affects our health. What are the effects that it has, whether it be, being, whether it be, by the way, my mother is literally calling me right now.
That's okay. You should always pick up a call from your mom. Go for it.
I was like, decline my mom. What is the difference between, like what the health benefits, and then what can happen to you if you're sort of experiencing intense loneliness?
Yeah, so there are several effects that loneliness has on us. At the most visceral level, it just doesn't feel good, and it can be emotionally draining to us. And that can impact how we show up with our family members and how we show up at work with our work colleagues. And if we're a young person who's in school or in university, it can also affect how we show up and perform academically. So there's just a direct effect on our mood. But what's also interesting is that there is an effect on our physical health as well. And this is in part mediated by a stress response that's induced by loneliness. And if you want to understand why loneliness causes the kind of stress response it does, you have to rewind a few thousand years to the point where we were hunter-gatherers, and when we were largely surrounded by predators, but also had to forage for food on our own. And in that environment, we really relied on each other for safety. There truly was safety in numbers, because together we could protect each other from predators. We could share our food and ensure that nobody starved on a given day. And so when we were separated from our tribe, our chances of survival dropped. And we knew that, and that induced a stress state that prepared us to either fight or to flee, and in either way urged us to go find our tribe again. Now, that stress state can be good in some ways because it can motivate us to move faster and to be more effective in reconnecting. The problem is when it lasts for a long period of time. And like any stress state, chronic stress can lead to increased inflammation in our bodies, which can increase our risk of heart disease and other chronic illnesses. And that's probably in part why we see studies like out of Brigham Young University done by Julianne Holt-Lunstad, which have shown us that loneliness is associated with an increased risk of not just heart disease, but also depression and dementia and anxiety and premature death and sleep disturbances. Julianne, in fact, found that there's even a mortality impact of loneliness, that people who are lonely seem to live shorter lives, and the shortening of their lives, that mortality impact is similar to that of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's greater than that of obesity.
I mean, that was one of the statistics that was mind-blowing to me. Can you repeat that again?
Sure. So loneliness is associated with a shortening of our lifespan, and the degree to which our life is shortened seems to be similar to that of smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and greater than the mortality impact we see with obesity or sedentary living.
It's just wild.
It was unexpected for me as well. And in particular, I found this research when I was still Surgeon General, and I was reflecting on the fact that I was sitting in a position and occupying an office that for decades had spent time focusing on those three issues, on smoking, on obesity, on sedentary living. But it had not been clear to me at all that loneliness was perhaps just as important as many of those other public health concerns.
Do you think that your tenure as Surgeon General had that kind of impact for you to move in that direction, or at least focus on it?
Absolutely. And it was, what was interesting about it, Kate, is that even though I had had experiences of loneliness myself as a child, and it was deeply wounding to me as a child to be as lonely as I was for all those years, and even though I saw loneliness in my patients as a doctor, I still hadn't realized just how consequential it was or how common it was until I was Surgeon General. And I started going around the country and having all of these conversations with people where they wouldn't say, hi, I'm Kate, I'm Vivek, I'm lonely. But they would say things like, I feel if I disappear tomorrow, no one would even know. Or I feel I have to carry all of these burdens in my life by myself. Or I feel invisible. And hearing that again and again from moms and dads, from students in high school and in college, hearing it from people in fishing villages in Alaska and small towns in the Midwest, to members of Congress, actually in Washington, D.C., who would tell me this behind closed doors, it became clear to me that what I was experiencing in my life, that was not unique to my own experience, but there was something far more common that was going on.
Do you think that maybe the sort of the impact of loneliness and what that does lead to polarization in our country? You know, you mentioned
Does.
politics, you mentioned all around the world, you have people that are sort of, I kind of see it in social media. You see people sort of spewing things that feel really shocking or, and it has to come from something. I wonder if part of that is loneliness.
I think there is a deep connection here. And I think that the fact that our relationships with each other have been fraying over time, Kate, the fact that we spend less time having friends over, that we're, few of us or fewer of us tend to be members of social organizations and have communities, I think makes dialogue harder. And this is because when you have a relationship with somebody, one of the key things that happens is that you're better able to listen to them because you give them the benefit of the doubt. You trust them a little bit more than a total stranger. And when you listen to people, that's when you can actually have dialogue with them. And when you
And
dialogue is when you
empathy
can...
too. Isn't listening also a part of how we sort of practice the empathetic part of our brain?
It is. And empathy is something that is a powerful part of the human experience, but is most powerfully experienced actually face to face, right? Which is why it is so much easier to say hurtful things to people online when you don't even see their reaction and you don't even know who they are. A lot of times you just see a handle that you're responding to in the comments section of an article or on social media. But the truth is that, as beings, we evolve to interpret all of these signals from people, their facial expressions, their body language, the tone of their voice, as well as what they're saying. And when we sense that somebody is hurt, then we're less likely to say something hurtful to them because they're right in front of our face. But coming back to this, how it affects our politics, the bottom line is if we do not have strong connections with each other, which means that we can't listen to each other, which means we can't dialogue with each other, then that makes it harder for us to come together and address issues like climate change or inequalities in our healthcare system or other challenges that we may be facing. And this is not just true of the US. It's happening in countries all over the world, which are starting to see this fraying. So if we want to fix the polarization in our politics, part of what we have to do is ask the question, how do we strengthen connection between people, not just between their friends and their families, between them and their neighbors, other members of their community, so they feel part of a collective and they feel a sense of responsibility to each other.
It's just amazing, isn't it? Every time I talk about this and we start talking about the importance of human connection, it's a very emotional experience, especially right now with COVID and everyone sort of being isolated to their homes, or a lot of people. How do you think right now, and what timing for this book to be something that I think everybody should be looking at and looking into, but how do you think that the sort of mental health and the loneliness has been affected by this COVID? It must be terrible.
Well, I think it's been really hard, Kate, for so many people, because unlike a hurricane or a tornado, which turn our lives upside down, but do so for a discrete period of time, and we know when they're over, COVID-19 has been like a storm that has moved in and has just sat on top of us. And we don't know exactly when it's going to end. And it's been incredibly stressful for so many people whose lives have been turned upside down, who've incurred economic hardship. For many people, they or relatives or people they love have gotten ill. But on top of all of that, what we typically do during moments of stress is we reach out to each other, right? We call a friend, we go see someone we love. And when we're being asked to physically distance from each other, that makes that incredibly important source of stress relief, which is our relationships, all the more difficult to access. So I think what we are seeing now is stressful. And I think it will, similar to other natural disasters, but even to a greater degree, I think increase levels of depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. But as concerning as that is, Kate, and as worried as I am that we may incur this deeper social recession when marked by higher levels of loneliness the longer this goes on, I don't think it necessarily has to be this way. I think we can choose how we respond to COVID-19. And instead of going down the path of social recession, I think we can choose the path of a social revival. But that depends on us using this moment to pause and just take stock of our lives, to ask ourselves, what role do we want relationships to really play in our life? What priority do we want them to have? And can we use this moment to recommit to people and to incorporate some simple practices in our life that won't take very much time, but that can help us deepen our connections with each other?
I mean, I was going to wait till the end to talk about what some of those activations are. But why don't you share some of the things that you talk about in the book about the simple things we can do to connect?
Well, absolutely. And Kate, this was like one of the most important realizations I came to from writing this book, which is that, some people write books, Kate, because they've done 30 years of research and they want to share everything they know with the world.
Mm-hmm.
And other people write books because they know there's a journey they need to go on, a journey of discovery, and they want to bring other people along with them on that journey. And my experience was certainly the latter. And I entered into this journey, not just because I saw loneliness as a public health issue, because I myself was struggling with figuring out how to build a more connected life for myself. I was dealing with loneliness, not just as a kid, but while I was Surgeon General, and certainly in the months and the years that followed afterward. And one of the things I realized is that we don't necessarily need to transform our lives entirely, quit our jobs, move to a new city, in order to build a connected life. It's the small things we do, in fact, that can make a big difference. So here are some small things. So number one, if we take this moment to carve out at least 10 to 15 minutes each day where we're spending time with someone we love, video conferencing with them, calling them on the phone, even writing them to see how they're doing. That may seem like a small amount of time, but it can boost your mood significantly and can serve as a lifeline to the outside world when it's done consistently. The second small thing we can do is to focus on the quality of time we spend with one another. So even if we don't spend a single minute more with the people we love, if we can give them the gift of our full attention by eliminating distraction when we're with them, that can really boost the quality of the interaction. And if you just consider this, like all of us have had the experience at some point in our life of having a conversation with someone when they were listening deeply to us, when they were giving us their full attention, when we were able to share openly with them as well. And you know how good that feels. That's the experience of being seen truly, of being witnessed in a way. And it feels amazing.
I think it's also easier said than done, Vivek, because being heard or feeling seen, I think a lot of people I know I feel it all the time, whether it be with my kids, my partner, my parents, there's so many times where I think that is something that people struggle with. It's like, I just want you to see me as I am, and like you're saying, that does take a dedicated listener.
It really does. And it's such a good point, Kate. I think you're absolutely right that so many people want to be seen for who they are and feel that they're not, and feel either that people don't understand them, or a lot of times people don't feel comfortable even being who they are because they feel that other people may disapprove of them or that they're not enough in some way. And so they strive to fit other people's expectations in their interactions online or even offline. But I think as human beings, Kate, that all of us want to be seen for who we are. All of us want to know that we matter, and all of us want to be loved. Those are three common needs that we all have. And the interesting thing about that is that we can convey that to another human being by the power of our presence, by listening deeply to someone else. We think so often that when someone approaches us and they're not doing well, they're in a bad place, that we've got to say something to fix them, right? To solve their problem. But so many times it is our presence, even without the words we speak, that can be profoundly healing.
Yeah.
And it was something I had
It's funny you're saying that. I think a lot of male-female relationships would and I can only relate to that because my own relationships, but that is something that women feel a lot of times because men are such fixers. It's like you just want to tell them how you feel. Just listen. I just want you to know how I feel. I don't need to fix anything. But yeah, I mean, how that translates into all relationships or moments like that.
No, you're totally right. And listen, as a guy, in a relationship, I've done the same thing. I've made that same mistake. And there are times my wife, Alice, has said to me, I don't need you to fix this. I just need you to listen.
Yeah.
And it's been an important reminder for me that, gosh, I don't, because sometimes like we feel the need to fix things, and that's actually about us, not about the other person. Like we want to feel like we're doing something worthwhile. We want to feel meaningful. We want to feel like we have value, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in truth, focusing on the other person involves putting a lot of that aside and saying, how can I just serve them in the way that they need right now?
So funny, as we're talking about this, you know, if anybody's been through a therapeutic process, there's a lot of words that are used, like I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel safe, you know. But what's coming up for me as I'm talking to you is the word safe. And when you know, like when you're talking about your wife, when you know that you're feeling heard, there is a sense of safety, of feeling held. And just because you know, it's almost like, and then in return you feel gratitude that you have someone that can hear you, and yet immediately makes you feel connected.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's, you know, you hear all these words, but that the core of it is connection, isn't it?
It really is. And I like the word safety that you used as well, because when somebody's listening to you and you also know that they're not judging you, when you know that they love you, they appreciate you for who you are, they're willing to give you the benefit of the doubt, that's what lets people also open up even more, you know, and let themselves be seen. Otherwise, I'm always worried, is that, oh gosh, I'm like sharing what I really feel, but how's that other person thinking about me? And maybe I don't want to say
Yeah.
too much because maybe they'll think I'm weird. Yeah. So, yeah.
I have a question. You know, I've sadly have had a lot of friends who, as our kids get into teenage years, have struggled with their younger kids and depression, and their kids feeling very alone, no matter how much love or connectivity that you're giving them, that this sense of loneliness that sort of exists outside of connection. For someone who's experiencing that, I mean, clearly I know that, you know, seek your doctor and things like that, but I mean, what would you say to them, or things that they could do with their teens as their brains are on fire, right? You know, and changing and developing and moody.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And Kate, I'll tell you that it was such a common question that I got from moms and dads across the country, and I still do to this day, because rates of depression and anxiety are alarmingly high among young people, right? And so a couple of things I think that to keep in mind. So one, with the caveat certainly that severe depression and anxiety do require medical attention, and often in those cases, medication can be an important part of the treatment strategy. What we also know, though, is that social connection can be very helpful when it comes to helping boost people's mood, even when they're struggling with depression. And that loneliness also, interestingly, can look like depression. See, people have sometimes a stereotype in their mind of what loneliness looks like, right? That loneliness is somebody sitting alone in a corner at a party. That's what loneliness is.
That sounds fine to me. I'm sitting alone at a party.
As an introvert, that sounds pretty good to me too.
Yeah, watching, you know. Like, oh, that's nice.
But a lot of times loneliness can look like irritability or anger, as it commonly manifests in older men who retire or get ill or lose a spouse and are plunged into loneliness. Sometimes it can look like withdrawal or like depression or like anxiety. So it looks like different things depending on who we are. But regardless, social connection can be helpful, either in addressing true organic depression or in addressing what looks like depression if it's really social disconnection. And there are a couple of ways to think about this, because I know the question that parents sometimes ask themselves is, if my child knows that I love them unconditionally, why would they feel lonely? Why would they feel that they didn't have a sense of self-worth? And it has to do in part because we need different types of relationships in our life. And those correspond to 3 different types of loneliness that can crop up when we're missing relationships in those categories. So the first kind of relationships that we need are intimate relationships. These are relationships with a spouse or with a close friend, or somebody who really knows us for who we are and who we can be open with. And when we don't have those, we experience intimate loneliness. The second kind of relationship that we need are friendships in our life. So people with whom we can spend weekends and evenings with, who we can go on vacations with, who we can just spontaneously, have a fun dinner with, and maybe alone or with our families. when we lack those friendships, then we experience relational loneliness. And the third is the importance of community, having a group of people with whom we have a shared identity. And that could be, we have a shared identity because we're part of the same faith group, or it could be we're part of the same nonprofit organization and we have a mission that we're passionate about and we all volunteer together. It could be that we're part of a mom's group or a dad's group and we have an identity as a parent that binds us together. When we don't have that kind of community connection, then we experience collective loneliness. And if you understand these three types of loneliness, you can understand why somebody may have trusted relationships in their life. They may have a spouse who loves them. They may have a marriage that's working really, really well. But they may experience loneliness if they're not having the kind of friendships they need or the kind of community that they require. And if you don't understand these types of loneliness, then as a spouse, you might think, gosh, if my partner is lonely, that must be my fault. Something must be wrong with our marriage. Or if I'm a parent and my child is lonely, then I must not be providing them something. Here's one last thing I'll say about kids, which is really important. And it's really important to me personally, just as a dad who's worried about my own children as I think about them growing up, which is, I think what's really essential for kids and what their foundation for connecting with other people is based on is the strength of their connection actually with themselves. And to be connected to oneself is to be grounded, to be centered, to know your worth and value. And if you think about that for a moment and think about the messages that are coming to our children and frankly to all of us about what constitutes our worth and value, we're told in modern society that you have worth if you are successful, and you're successful if you are able to acquire either wealth, power, or fame. Mm-hmm. And so we hold people up who have acquired one of those things or all of those things, and we say, look, they've made it. They're successful. But how many people do we know who have become wealthy or powerful or famous who are profoundly unhappy because they're alone?
Ticket. It is definitely not the golden ticket,
Right.
I've lost many friends to whether it be mental, health, their mental health or addiction. You realize that wealth, fame, success in those terms aren't an answer to what we're discussing.
That's right. And
or a solution.
Right. And we don't want our children to think that that's their source of worth, right? Instead, what we want our kids to know is that their source of value is intrinsic. That what makes us valuable as human beings is our ability to give and receive love. That is at the heart of what makes us valuable. And the way we experience that love is through our relationships.
Yeah.
Right? That's why relationships are so powerful. So I think that when kids lose sight of what makes them worthy as human beings, that's often when many of their challenges begin, because then they start seeking validation elsewhere, whether that's in being popular or whether that's in, again, being with the right crowd. And they start doing things to be a part of a community, even if it's not really who they are, even if it's dangerous or destructive. I talked to people who joined gangs and ended up going to prison for decades of their life. And when I talked to them about why they joined the gang, they said, because we were so profoundly lonely in our life that the gang presented a community that we had never had before. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, did you know that it was dangerous, that you were putting your life at risk? And they said, yes, we did, but it felt so horrible to be alone. We just wanted to be with other people. We wanted to be someplace that felt like home, where we were accepted.
One belongs, yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, it's just, all of these things become, which I love. What I love about this book, when we listen to these things, it feels, it's like, it's simple, not simplistic. But then if you actually activate little things, they can go a long way. And so I just appreciate what you've put in this. I think I do have one question about your tenure as Surgeon General. And what is a listening tour?
So a listening tour is, well, the way I did it, and everyone will do it a little differently, but the way I did it is I told my team, let us just go to visit people across the country and ask them a simple question, which is, how can we help? And then let's sit back and listen to what they say. Mm-hmm. And it was literally that simple. That's what we did. And so we sometimes went to community centers and talked to people there. Sometimes we set up town halls coordinating with a sponsoring organization or with the mayor in a small town. Sometimes we went to schools and
And did you
talked
go
to students.
all over the country?
All over the country.
Cool.
Yeah, that's right.
And
And I'll tell you that.
What was the big, I mean, clearly, obviously it was this, but I mean, what was the sort of impact, like how did that impact you?
Well, it really had a profound impact on what I did. I mean, I don't think I would have focused on loneliness for sure if I had not done that tour and heard the extraordinary stories I did. But there were other things too. I remember going to a town hall in Seattle where a teacher had joined us, and she said to me, and this is early in 2015, she said, my kids can't chew gum in class because it's not allowed. They certainly can't smoke or drink in class, but they're vaping in class because we don't have rules around it. And she said, and I said, well, why don't you have a rule around that? She said, well, we don't because the city doesn't. The city doesn't because they're waiting for the federal government to come up with something. And that ended up being like a motivation for me to produce what became the first Surgeon General's report on e-cigarettes on youth. So there were things that I heard around e-cigarettes, around the opioid crisis, which increased my sort of conviction that we had to build serious campaigns around this issue. But there was actually one other thing that I took from that listening tour that will always stick with me, which was just a reaffirmation of just, I don't know how else to put this, but just how good people are. Because, you read the papers and you hear about all of this caustic polarization. You hear about people not treating each other well and all kinds of bad things, that are happening in society.
They love negative attention. They love the negative,
Yeah. And what you take away from that, if you don't know better, is that people are sort of fundamentally mean. They're all looking out for themselves. And we're just seeing human nature on display here. But that's actually not at all what I saw. When the cameras were off and when we were just talking to people in their living rooms and in these small gatherings, what I heard was people who had a tremendous well of compassion and who were trying to help members of their family, members of their community. I remember encountering people who were gathering together around parents who had lost loved ones because they knew that how terrible that was as parents, and they wanted to support these folks even though they didn't know them at times. I ran into people who recognized that that the rates of obesity were skyrocketing in their community. This was in Birmingham, Alabama. And they had built groups that were going door to door just to ask people to come out for a walk with them because they wanted their community to be healthier. I mean, in moments of crisis is when our true colors show. And if you look at COVID-19, Kate, if we look at 9/11, if we look at Hurricane Katrina and other moments like that, and we look at what actually happened on the ground, that's when we see what people are made of, because people stepped up to help each other. They were there for each other, even often at great peril to themselves, right? That's the story of the 9/11 boat lift, right? People who, which is an interesting and powerful story that's a little known about 9/11, but when the towers came down and people were trying to escape, they didn't know often where they were going, what direction they were fleeing, because the smoke was so dense. And many who thought they were going north actually ended up fleeing south, and they ended up being trapped at the southernmost tip of Manhattan, where all they had in front of them was the Hudson River stretching on. And as the smoke was building behind them, people got more and more anxious, and thousands of people were building at this point. So the Coast Guard then made an unprecedented decision, seeing so many people there and knowing they didn't have enough boats to rescue them right away. They issued this call, an unprecedented call, to all the civilian boats in the area. And they said, we need help orchestrating a civilian rescue. And they waited to see what happened. Now, think about this for a moment. You've got one of the worst disasters, the worst terrorist attack that has ever happened in the United States. It's still unfolding. So we don't know if there are more planes coming. We don't know what is going to happen. Most people, if they just looked out for themselves, would be fleeing the other way. But within minutes, there were scores of boats that were streaking toward the southernmost tip of Manhattan. And people brought folks onto their boats. They gave them water. They ferried them to safety. And all in all, over the course of hours, they rescued nearly 500,000 people, which became the largest boat rescue in the history of the world, even larger than Dunkirk. That's what people do when the chips are down.
Story. I didn't know that story. And I think that it also says a lot about New York. I just love that city. You know, I lived there for a long time, and during 9/11, we were living there, and what an amazing city New York is in times where people need to come together. You know, and people, like you said, it's a great, because it's so dense, because there are so many people in one dense area, it's a great representation of what the human condition is capable of.
Yes. No, it really is.
So let's talk about the virtual interactions. Like, do you think that this is a adequate form of connection, or do we need to touch each other? Moving forward, hugging and holding, and, you know, that tactile connection, does that also help?
It helps a lot.
Yeah.
And we were designed to be in physical contact with each other. You know, even if you look at our ancestors, you know, our simian ancestors, what you see is they spend a lot of time grooming each other. And what happens when they groom each other is it's not just the utility of cleaning each other's fur that, you know, that's the purpose of grooming. Grooming actually strengthens connection between those beings, because when you groom, that physical contact actually generates a hormonal response in your body, which makes you feel more closely connected to the other being. And that's true of human beings as well, is that when we have physical contact with other people, it causes a surge in hormones in our body as well, which strengthen our sense of connection. So you cannot replace human touch. And while being able to talk as we're talking today, Kate, is so powerful, and it's so much better than only being able to write letters or only being able to text, because I can see your face, I can hear the tone of your voice, I can see your facial expressions and your body language. And over thousands of years, we learned to interpret all of that because we had to figure out if we could trust somebody, if we wanted to be in a relationship with them. So I miss, you know, that physical proximity with other human beings. And I'm fortunate that I'm quarantining right now with my wife and my kids and my mom and my dad and my sister and my grandmother, my brother-in-law. So we're all together, right? So
there, I love it. What a great thing. So can I explain, or why don't you explain, you know, just really quickly what happened with during this quarantine time?
Oh, you mean why we came down here?
Yeah, you came down. Your parents are in Florida.
Yeah, so I grew up in Miami. My parents and sister are still here, and my grandmother lives here too. But my wife and my kids and I, we live in DC. And my grandmother, unfortunately, earlier this year fractured her hip. And we were coming down to spend some time with her during the recovery. And this was in early March. And we knew the night before we came down, as things were getting more and more serious with COVID-19, that there was a chance we wouldn't be able to come back. So we had to make a decision. Do we cancel our trip, or do we go down, knowing that we could be there for months? And it was a simple decision in the end. We said we'd rather be with family during a time like this, even though it's going to be displacing for us, even though it's probably going to be super chaotic. And it has been super chaotic. You know, there are so many days when we're trying to figure out everyone's schedule, when I'm on a conference call and trying to clean up a potty training accident, and like all kinds of crazy things are going on. But, you know, it's nice to be in the same place with family. And I say that knowing that so many people are actually alone during this quarantine period, and it's really, really hard. And that's one of the reasons I think it's so important for us to do everything possible to reduce the peak of these infections, to work as hard as possible to find an effective medicine and a vaccine. Because as important and as much as technology has served as a lifeline for us during times like this, we know there's nothing like being together in person. And I think that's what we all crave.
Oh, I feel like more and more, especially during this time, these are the conversations that people are having. And like you said, it's either based on the fact that there's someone you know who is feeling a very intense feeling of feeling alone and loneliness. And then also for those that are together, that they're sort of reevaluating what their life looks like together as a unit. I know that's happening to us. I know that's happened to my brother. I know that's even happening for my mom and my dad, living alone together. You know, we we spend so much time working, focusing on other things, moving around our cities, and all of a sudden we're kind of stuck together, you know, and there's this really interesting, I think, awakening happening, that if in the most positive way, there's also, of course, the times where you have to learn how to have alone time, but which is one question I have for you as well. But I feel like people are really learning how to connect differently. You know, I've noticed that social media, even though we're using it now almost more than ever, because we're alone together, that we turn off our phones, act like not even having to tell someone to, and we're communicating more. We're sitting, we're listening, we're finding other things to do than just scrolling through an Instagram. And my hope is that out when we start to venture out, that people kind of take stock of this time where we really did have that strong connection with family and how important it was. I see my children thriving. Are you seeing them thrive right now because of the unit?
Yeah, well, I think they're definitely loving being with their aunt and their uncle and their grandparents and their great grandmother. I mean, I see how much joy it's bringing to my family as well, to have these small kids who are 3 and 2 running around the house and just bringing so much joy to their lives. So, you know, there's certainly been an adjustment. I mean, they're young, the kids, so they don't fully understand why we're not in Washington, D.C., and they're wondering where their friends are and where some of their toys are. And so some of that has been a little tough to explain to them, but I do think they're thriving. And I do think that this, as you so eloquently said, this is an opportunity for us, this moment, as painful and as hard as it is. I think it's a chance for us to ask ourselves what kind of life we really want to lead when this is all over. What role do we want our relationships to play in the larger priority list of our life? You know, I like many people, have always prioritized people, but haven't always been good and making sure that the way I live my life actually lines up with those priorities. And if I'm honest, I would say that I've often put work ahead of the people in my life. Coming out of this experience, and certainly after talking to so many of the people I talked to in the writing of this book, I've realized that I don't want to do that anymore, that I actually want to recommit to the relationships in my life. And part of the reason is, Kate, is I don't want to wait until the very end of my life to realize that the people who were most important to me were not the ones that I spent the most quality time with. You know, I can't help so often thinking about the people who I cared for in the hospital at the end of their lives, the people who I was privileged to talk to in those final days and those final hours. And I think about what they talked about, because what they talked about was not how famous they were, how many followers they had on social media. They didn't talk about the promotions they got or how big their bank accounts were. What they talked about were their relationships, the people they loved, people they wished they had spent more time with, the people who broke their hearts. It's so clear at the end of our lives that what matters is people. And I think the challenge for all of us, the challenge for me, but as the opportunity that we have now is to reset in our lives, to realize those lessons that so many of my patients came to at the end of their lives, and to say, we know that that's what matters right now. And we can start rebuilding our lives around people. Because when we build our lives around people, we're not only healthier and more resilient, but we're more fulfilled. And we help create the foundation for a people-centered society where we design our schools and our workplaces to support relationships, where we even think about the impact that public policy has on social connection and on human relationships. That is what a people-centered life looks like. And we have the opportunity to walk down the path of creating that right now.
I could just listen to you talk forever. You've got such a, you know, it's so nice to listen to you talk about this, and you're so right. I mean, I say that a lot about my life, where it's like, and the older I get, the more I enjoy connecting with people. That is one of the things that when, you know, I just think about, like, too, you know, you get asked questions a lot when people ask, how do you create balance? How do you live your life? How do you do this? You're like, well, for me, it's like, I go from, it's almost like I want to live looking at the end of my life, moving backwards, when I'm sitting on my deathbed, which will happen, I'm not afraid of that. And, but when that day comes, what am I going to be what is going to be my true legacy? And of course it's your children, but it's also, like you said, it's the connections, it's the people you love. It's those moments of those connections. I had a moment like that day before yesterday. I was sitting at a table and I had this overwhelming feeling of just feeling like I'm where I'm supposed to be. And I clocked it, because when those things happen, when I just feel totally, truly joyful, I'm like, what is this feeling? Where is this coming from? And it really did. It was coming from the connection and what was going on with my family in that moment. Those are the things that when I get older and I'm looking back at my life, that will bring me the most sense of accomplishment, is that I had that kind of love.
That's so wonderful that you know that.
I know, I think that if we really break this all down, I think when you actually open yourself up to that kind of connection, life becomes really hard and sad, because you have to leave it at some point. So there's this sort of you can call it spiritual, you can call it faith, you can call it or just acceptance or surrender. But, when you allow yourself the ability to love really big and connect and really be present with people that you love, it's sad to leave them. Yeah. And it's scary. Yeah. And so I think it sometimes closes people off, and they get scared, to connect, because if you do, you're going to lose them. So I think that one of my things is sort of the acceptance of what we are as mortal creatures. Actually also goes a long way. Once you become kind of a fearless mortal, you can kind of open yourself up, I think, to loving even bigger or connecting even bigger. I know that's maybe kind of weird and heavy, but.
No, it's not. It's actually really beautiful. And I think what you're hitting on is at the heart of this conversation we've been having, because it is about how we can love more and love deeply. That's at the heart of what connection is. And loving can be scary at times, because we can worry about what happens when it's over, about the loss. But the truth is that if we're not loving, then we're not living, right? We were designed to experience love, to give it, to receive it. Those are the moments that are often most gratifying to us. Somebody asked me if I had an alternative title to the book, and I actually did have one. Yeah, and the alternative title was Radical Love.
Oh, because, interesting.
Yeah, because that's the fuel. Love is the fuel that powers our life.
I love Radical Love. That should be like a t-shirt.
Is it too late to change the title? I think it
No. Together is perfect. But Radical Love is like, that's like, I love,
Yeah, and
that.
The reason I think I thought it was an important title is because radical means it's a major shift that we have to make from where we are now as a society to really being a love-based and love-centered society. But it's not at all radical in the sense that we were designed to be love-oriented creatures, and that the journey toward living a life that's centered around love and relationship is not the journey to transform ourselves into something we're not. It's a journey to return to who we are, and we've always been for thousands of years. And that's what we're grappling with. And the thing is, and this as a mom, Kate, like our kids know this intuitively, right? Yeah. When they're born, they give and receive love freely. Oh my God. Have so few inhibitions.
Oh, I watch Ronnie right now. All she wants to do is like hold and love, and she just wants to like hug. Yeah. It's a little hard. It's a little sad right now, because she's sort of wants to, like, you know, she sees my mom and she's like, oh, you know,
Oh,
you can't hug mommy right now, but you know, it's a little challenging, but yeah, you can see it.
yeah. So I think that's really what this is about, Kate, in so many ways. It's about how do we, in our own lives, make sure that we are living from a place of love? How do we make sure that what we are bringing to the world is more love and less fear? Because that is the dyad that I worry about most, is this struggle between love and fear. Because those are the two forces that are motivating so much of what we do in the world, right? That love,
Truly.
which is showing up as kindness and compassion and generosity and warmth, but that fear shows up too as anger and insecurity and jealousy and rage. And we see it in our lives, we see it in our communities, we see it in our workplaces and our politics. But it comes down to this struggle between love and fear. And in these moments, what I've realized I want to do, what Alice and I made a pact to do more of when we realized we were pregnant with our first child, is to take every step that we could to tilt the world toward love and away from fear. And to do that by how we treated other people, to do that by what we chose to work on in our lives, by what we chose to speak up on in the public square. In our own way, each of us can help put our finger on those scales and tip the balance toward love. And that is what I think we are called to do. And the most tangible way we experience that love is through relationships. That is why the path to greater fulfillment, to better health, to more resilience, goes through love. It goes through relationship.
Oh, I love it. We're on the same mission. And I'm with you, and the path is, I believe, towards love, and love does bring us together, and it does connect us. So hopefully it's books like this and conversations like this that allow people to feel that they can access that part of themselves and reach out, know that there's someone on the other side,
I
and
hope
somewhere
so.
they can go.
I hope so. And I, especially for young boys, I want them to know that allowing yourself to recognize that love is not a source of weakness is so important. You know, we tell our young boys that to be a real man, they've got to be stoic, not display any emotion, not show that they need anyone. But love is not a source of weakness. Love is one of our greatest sources of power. You know, we don't look at a soldier who throws himself on top of an IED to protect the soldier that he loves next to him. We don't look at that soldier as weak. We say that love has given him great strength. We don't look at a mom or a dad who's willing to throw themselves in harm's way to protect their child and say that they're weak. We recognize that their love is giving them power. The most extraordinary things that we do as human beings, we do because we're powered by love. And we have to teach our young girls that, and our young boys that, so they see love not as a source of weakness. So they recognize that emotions are not a sign of being soft, but instead they recognize that as human beings, we all experience emotions, and we have to use them in a way that strengthens us. And that means centering on, focusing on cultivating love.
Well, thank you for this. We are going to go. There's some questions from our virtual world, and so I want to ask some of those. But this has been such a wonderful conversation, inspiring, and you're the best.
It's so good to talk to you, Kate, as always.
Yeah, so nice. I'll see you soon, I'm sure. Well, we're going to do these questions, but. I mean, I won't see you soon, but hopefully I will see you soon at some point.
I hope so too. I hope that we get a vaccine quickly so that we can get immunity across the population and let people see each other again. Are you seeing Oliver and your mom? And
so I see them, but we don't we're not integrated.
Got it.
Because everybody's got their own. So we just want to be careful. I mean, maybe when it starts opening up a little bit more and there's a little bit more sort of freedom with that. I don't know. I'm just doing what I think is the right thing to do right now. But eventually, I told my mom, I really want to, it's hard for me not to be near my mom.
It was
you
so
know.
nice to see how close you both were when we were together in New York. It was really
Yeah,
beautiful.
she's my soft spot.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
like I feel like that's my, she's my best friend on the planet.
Yeah, that's
So,
really amazing. I'm also very close with my mother. So and I miss my mom a lot because I live in DC most of the time. So when I saw you with your mom, it made me miss my mom too, but appreciate what you guys had. And, being here, Kate, in Miami, it's been so interesting because you know how sometimes when you're with your parents, you regress to like who you were,
totally.
like when you were growing up. So like in high school, I was like always working until like the wee hours at the dining table. And now I find myself doing the same thing. I'm back at the dining table working till the wee hours. And my mom, a lot of times will just come out, or my dad will come out just to check on me, to ask me why I'm still up so late. And it's so interesting. They'll sometimes just put a hand on my shoulder, and it's like automatically I feel like the stress just drop like in my body. And I just like feel like this wave of love, that's been building for years. And it's just extraordinary. And I'm like, what an incredible thing to have parents who love
It
you.
is. And, it's one of the things, again, that like, hopefully these next generations, and what you said, young boys, like the importance of that love for children, that like, that we raise a new generation of like love and connectivity. And because there's nothing like having that support system.
Yeah.
It all starts right with our parents.
Yeah. It
It's
really
the
does.
reason why you're doing this work is because of the love and care that your parents provided
Absolutely.
you. And
Absolutely.
then I guess the lesson becomes that even if you didn't have that you can cultivate it.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely right. And that's
Okay,
what's
questions.
All right.
questions.
Our first question, and at Live Talks LA, I have a very strict rule about no two-part questions, but this one is so good, I am going to ask it.
Oh, okay.
Um, this person says, how do we talk to people we feel are experiencing loneliness? And the second part is, how do we listen to people who we think are feeling loneliness?
It's a really good question. Well, I think it's such a good question because when you see the statistics about how many people are struggling with loneliness, you come to realize that all of us likely know someone who is lonely, even if it doesn't look like that on the outside. One of the most powerful things we can do for people who are lonely is literally to give them that gift of our full presence, to listen to them, to give them an opportunity to share. And sometimes we have to recognize that sharing isn't always about talking, that even moments of silence, even sharing an experience together when words aren't being exchanged, can be really powerful. And so that's one simple thing that I would recommend. And I say that because it's so common for us to think that, gosh, we've got to say something, be funny, have a solution, come up with an idea in order to make the conversation meaningful. But our presence is powerful, and that's something we should remember. The second thing I would just say about this is it's not always important in the beginning to ask somebody if they're lonely, although if you feel moved to do that, you can. But what can often help make that discussion easier is if you're open about your own experiences. All of us have struggled with loneliness at some point in our lives, and many of us may be struggling with it right now. But when we open up to others, when we're vulnerable, then what we're telling them is that this is a conversation where you can trust me because I'm trusting you with what I'm feeling. And that makes it easier for people to share what they're going through with their loneliness.
Next question. Lady asks, we're a country of many ethnicities and immigrants, and in some cultures, talking about mental issues is considered taboo. Any advice on how to change that and how to broach that?
Well, that's a great question, and it strikes home for me as well because I come from an immigrant family that came here from India, and there's a culture there that very much looks at mental health as a taboo issue, and people never talked about struggles with depression or anxiety. And it was quite striking to me just how little we talked about it when I was in high school, actually, one day, and I got a call from the woman that my uncle was rooming with at that time. Had just moved to the United States. He was living with two other people as he was just getting his feet on the ground and trying to make it here in a new country. And she couldn't figure out where he was because he wasn't answering his door. So I had her bang harder on the door and still no answer. So she called the police. And tragically, we found that he had taken his own life there, and that he had been a victim of suicide. And that was such a powerful moment for me as a child, being on the other end of that phone line, hearing her tell me that my uncle was dead, and just realizing that there was some deeper pain he had been struggling with that we had no idea about, because that just wasn't the kind of thing we talked about. So I do think that this stigma around mental illness that so many cultures share, it's present, it's powerful, and it can be really destructive, because it can force people to suffer in shame while they're already in pain because of their depression. One of the most important things we can do in moments like that is, if we know somebody who might be struggling, is simply, again, to engage them, to let them know that we know that depression and that mental health struggles are common. If we have had our own experiences in that realm, we can share that as well. And that may make it easier for them to share. But just because someone doesn't share with you the first time you have a conversation does not mean that that conversation wasn't worthwhile. Because simply knowing that there is somebody out there who does not judge them because of their struggles can be a powerful lifeline in someone's life. And finally, I just say leading by example is so powerful in these cultures. The reason things change in immigrant cultures here in the United States around mental health, the reason they've started to, is because more and more people have chosen courageously to share their story in public settings, whether that's writing about it or sharing it in public speeches, or talking about it more openly with their families behind closed doors. That's how things change, when we're open and honest about what we're going through. It takes courage. It means we have to stick by each other. But I do think that things can get better.
Next question, clearly a parent. She says, first time going to college comes with its own challenges, and meeting new people and surroundings at a new school is a big part of making that transition. Today, many schools are looking at the fall being online only. Any thoughts on how an 18-year-old deals with this new challenge and how their parents can help and support them?
Yeah, gosh, isn't this the question of the moment for so many people whose kids were looking forward to starting this whole new life in college? All of a sudden, the world is turned upside down.
Yeah.
And look, I think number one, it's okay to acknowledge to your kids that we don't have all the answers here to how to build a meaningful college experience, which includes a meaningful social experience. But fortunately, unlike 20 years ago, we have better technology to stay somewhat connected with each other, whether those are old high school friends or even to meet new friends in settings online. It's not the same as being in person, but it is possible. And what I actually do talk to universities and to secondary schools around the country about how they're thinking about opening up. And what I'm encouraged by is that despite the limitations that we have, many are trying to think about how to create small groups with some measure of intention and structure. They can enable people to build stronger relationships with each other in those smaller groups, even though they don't know each other. This is something that companies have been doing on a very small scale, and I actually write about some examples of that in my book, including an exercise that we did in the Office of the Surgeon General called the Inside Scoop exercise, which was a simple 5-minute exercise once a week, but that built powerful bonds between all of us in the office. But the point about this is that we're going to have to get creative in how we use technology and how we build structure around fostering connection between students who are coming together for the first time. The good news is that I don't think this is going to be a permanent experience, for their entire college experience. So if your kid is starting in the fall, they're going to be able, most likely, to be able to enjoy an in-person college experience before they graduate. We've got a ways to go before that comes, but I'm optimistic that we will have a vaccine and that we'll be able to protect everyone and resume, hopefully, a more normal way of life.
I want to add to this just because I have a 16-year-old, and that age is really interesting. From the high teens, it can feel like the end of something. Can feel like the end of the world if it's not going as expected. When you're that age, it can be quite myopic. And I always just say and try to kind of support Ryder and just go like, this will end. and your life is just beginning. You've got all of these amazing things ahead of you, and this year or year and a half that you're going to have to sort of make a different kind of adjustment will be something you'll look back on and never forget. And you're a part of history, even though it's a uncertain and kind of, but there's something happening that you're a part of, that when you look back and tell your grandkids, you're going to be able to say, like, yeah, I was a part of that moment in history, and I wasn't able to go to college the first year, so I try to kind of shift the focus into something that is interesting, and that will change, that will eventually, they'll get there,
Next question. With so many people working from home in some industries, there's the suggestion that perhaps this can continue. Obviously, trying to save money. There's a social nature to work in a physical location. So my question to you is, do you see a concern for certain industries suggesting that more people work from home?
That's a really important question. I think in the short term, we're going to see more companies lean toward working from home for safety reasons until we do have a vaccine. But I do think, and I should say also that I think it's been beneficial that we've had the option of working from home for so many people for whom otherwise they might be on the train or commuting for hours a day. And this gives them the opportunity to be at home more often, to spend time with their family. So that can be very, very powerful. But it would be a mistake to assume that all workplaces should go to being as virtual as possible. Because the truth is that there is great power in being together in person. Being able to do a meeting in person is often more powerful than doing it online, because you have everyone's full attention, and also because there's just something about being in person with each other, being physically present with one another, being proximate to each other, that just changes the nature of the interaction. There's also just more spontaneous interaction that can occur when you're walking down a hallway and you see someone, or you sit down next to somebody in the cafeteria and have a conversation that was unplanned. Those human moments are precious. They're valuable, not just because they make us happier and strengthen human connection, but because they actually have a measurable impact on productivity and creativity as well in the workplace. So I think it would be a mistake to say, gosh, COVID-19 has taught us that we can all work virtually. We should just keep doing that even when we don't need to. I think we have to balance that with a recognition that there's a lot we get out of being in person at work, being in person at school, and we've got to get back to that kind of environment as soon as it's safe to do so.
I see Jon Kabat-Zinn has blurbed your book. Could you talk a little bit about meditation?
Absolutely. So meditation is a very powerful tool, and few people have written about it as eloquently or as beautifully as Jon Kabat-Zinn has. But here's where it fits in so beautifully. We started this conversation talking about some simple steps that people can take to strengthen connection in their life, like putting aside a little bit of time each day, making sure the quality of that time counts by reducing distraction. We also recognize that service is a very powerful way of strengthening our connection with others. And when we serve other people, whether it's helping a neighbor who's struggling or a coworker, whether it's offering to virtually babysit for 5 or 10 minutes, that these are small ways that we build a bridge to someone else and reaffirm the value we have to bring to the world. But what's also very striking, and where meditation fits in, and this is somewhat unexpected, is that solitude is an important part of building connection with others. And you might think, gosh, isn't solitude about being alone? How does that strengthen your connection? Well, it matters because our foundation for connecting with other people is built on a strong connection with ourself. And to be connected to oneself is to know that you have self-worth, to know that you have value. It's to be centered. It's to be grounded. Meditation is powerful because it's one of those experiences of solitude when we can let the noise around us settle, when we can recenter and reground ourselves, when we can give ourselves some time to simply be in a world that always seems to be about action and doing. And if we think about it, this tension between being and doing is one that flows through society, with the huge emphasis being on doing. But what we find is when we're able to spend some time being, which is when we're simply observing our settings, simply letting ourselves be in the moment, then that often can put us in a better place to take action more effectively or more efficiently. We know, for example, that when we're about to have a tough conversation with someone, sometimes if we just take 10 seconds and take a deep breath, just let ourselves settle, that we can go into that conversation from a better place and usually have a better outcome than if we just rush into it. Meditation is like that 10 seconds magnified. It allows us to enjoy the kind of grounding that we need to strengthen our connection with self so that we can approach other people from a place of groundedness, from a place of abundance. And when we do that, we find that the interactions are often better. What John Kabat-Zinn has done is he's taught mindfulness-based meditation, but which is a powerful form of meditation. There are others as well, and people have to find the right path that speaks to them. But solitude can be achieved through meditation, through walks in nature, through time spent reading a good book. It could be 5 minutes you spend on your porch feeling the breeze against your face. It could be a few moments spent remembering 3 things you're grateful for, or some time spent in prayer. There are many ways to feel solitude, but whether we're an extrovert or an introvert, solitude is important for all of us to ensure that we can stay grounded and connected to ourselves.
Vivek, I would like to add to that and ask a question, because I find, especially, my mom does a lot of work with meditation but really her whole foundation is based on neuroscience and this actual science behind meditation. And I think it's important to talk about that, because a lot of times meditation is seen as sort of alternative, when in fact there's so much research about how and what parts of the brain it actually affects and how it helps us. Can you maybe just indulge us a little bit about the neuroscience of it?
Yes. So what meditation can do is it can actually induce a relaxation response in our brain and in our nervous system, where we experience the flow of hormones, which reduce our stress levels and deepen relaxation in our tissues throughout our body. And that's why you see that meditation in some cases can have beneficial effects on blood pressure. It's why also you see people often saying they just feel more relaxed. They feel a greater sense of energy. Some people will say that they can concentrate better after meditating. The different benefits that we accrue are rooted actually in deeper study of meditation, which is look more deeply at how it actually affects our brain. And that's why we should think about meditation not necessarily as a religious practice. It's a tradition that is incorporated in many different faiths, across the world. But it's a practice that exists independent of religion as well, and one that we can use to, again, induce that state of relaxation, which can allow us, again, to feel better and can, in fact, change our body on a biochemical level. So that's why you're seeing also meditation incorporated more and more by the Veterans Administration to help veterans who are struggling with PTSD and with other conditions. You're seeing more and more doctors in their medical practices incorporating meditation for patients who are struggling with high levels of stress, but also with other physical health challenges. The more we learn about the body, the more we learn that the mind and the body are so deeply connected, and our emotions are also so deeply connected. We are single beings with different parts to us that all feed off of each other. And when we meditate, we bring benefits to our emotional state, to our mental state, and to our physical body that are really quite extraordinary.
Thank you.
I believe Dr. Daniel Siegel works closely with your mom.
Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love Dan. Dan, he's amazing.
Yeah, great person to have. Okay, our final question. There's a lot of talk about what happens in the transition between administrations, what one did or what did not do. I'm curious what the transition was like with you and your predecessor, and then what it was like between you and your successor.
Okay. So transitions are always, they're often chaotic. And, even though I know a lot of times on people like campaigns and new administrations will try to make it seem like everything is super smooth. There's just so much to shift and to change from one set of hands to another that there can be some degree of chaos. But what you rely on in those moments is good intentions, and you assume that people are there for the mission. In my own role as a Surgeon General, I succeeded Regina Benjamin, who was the Surgeon General during President Obama's first term. And I was succeeded by Dr. Jerome Adams, who was President Trump's Surgeon General. And with both of them, the relationship was very cordial. In fact, I count both of them as friends. And what we did is we stayed in touch. We talked about what worked, what didn't work honestly about the office. We talked about where we made some progress, but also where we fell short. And we also committed to each other to be there for them after that transition, if questions came up or if help was needed. And I leaned on not only Regina Benjamin, but also on her predecessors as well. I leaned on Richard Carmona, David Satcher, and others, because there were a small group of us, and we recognized that we had to help each other. And similarly, I stay in touch with Dr. Jerome Adams, and all of us, are there because we recognize that the mission is bigger than the man or woman in the role, and that for the time we occupied that role, we are stewards of an office. I used to always tell my team, we shouldn't think of ourselves in the way that I'm the Surgeon General and you are all part of the Surgeon General's team. We are the stewards of an office, of a calling that's much bigger than any one of us. And our goal is to leave it in a better, stronger place for the person who inherits this office after we're gone. And that's a philosophy, I think, that has carried through the office and made these transitions, even though they're somewhat chaotic, it's made them, I think, much smoother and easier and productive than they otherwise would have been.
Well, thank you, Dr. Murthy. Thank you, Kate. Really appreciate your time doing this. Very thoughtful conversation. Again, for our viewers and listeners, reminder, the book is Together, The Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World. It is available wherever books are sold. And we encourage you to visit bookshop.org as they work very hard to support independent bookstores and every author who needs it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much.